Let me tell you something that most Australians have never even considered. You could wake up tomorrow, go about your normal day, and without even realizing it, you might already be on the path to losing something you assumed was yours forever. Your Australian citizenship, or your permanent residency, gone. And the scary part? The government doesn't always send you a warning letter first. Stay with me. Because in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through 5 real documented ways that Australian citizens and permanent residents have lost their status. Some of them so surprising, so underreported, that even immigration lawyers don't bring them up unless you specifically ask. And at the end, I'll tell you the one thing you can do right now, today, to make sure none of this ever happens to you. This is Aussie Visa Updates, and if you're new here, welcome. We don't do surface-level content on this channel. We go deep, we go real, and we make sure you actually understand what's happening inside the Australian immigration system. Hit that subscribe button now, because what I'm about to share affects every single person watching this video. Let's start with something that sounds almost impossible. A story that made headlines a few years ago and shocked the legal community. A man, born in Australia, raised in Australia, went to school in Australia, discovered in his 40s that he was not actually an Australian citizen. Not because of some paperwork mix-up, not because of fraud, but because of a legal technicality buried deep inside the Australian Citizenship Act that almost nobody talks about. He had assumed, like most people assume, that being born on Australian soil meant he was automatically a citizen. But that assumption was wrong. And that assumption is where the first shocking truth begins. Here's the thing about Australian citizenship that the government website doesn't put in bold letters. Being born in Australia does not automatically make you a citizen. Not anymore. That rule changed in 1986. Before August 20th, 1986, yes, if you were born on Australian soil, you were an Australian citizen from birth. Simple. Clean. Done. But after that date, the rules shifted. Now, to gain citizenship by birth in Australia, at least one of your parents must have been an Australian citizen or a permanent resident at the time you were born. If both your parents were on temporary visas, student visas, work visas, tourist visas, then you were not born an Australian citizen, even if the hospital was in Sydney, even if your birth certificate says Melbourne, even if you've lived here your entire life. Why does this matter right now, today, in 2025? Because there are thousands of people living in Australia who believe they are citizens when they are legally not. And this isn't just an abstract problem. If you travel on what you think is your Australian citizenship, apply for a passport under false assumptions, or make decisions based on citizenship you don't actually hold, you are in serious legal territory. This is not about blame. This is about awareness, and this is exactly why you need to keep watching. Now, let's move into territory that affects people who absolutely, definitively, legally became Australian citizens, and then lost it anyway. Because this is where it gets truly alarming. Imagine you're an Australian citizen. You moved to another country for love, for work, for family. Maybe you became a citizen of that new country because it was easier to live there, to work there, to raise your kids there. You didn't think twice about what that might mean back home. Why would you? You're Australian. That's permanent, right? Wrong. And this is the second way people lose their citizenship. And it's one that has caught tens of thousands of Australians completely off guard over the decades. Under the old Australian Citizenship Act, the one that was enforced from 1948 all the way until 2002, if you voluntarily acquired the citizenship of another country, you automatically lost your Australian citizenship. Automatically. No letter, no hearing, no choice. The moment you swore allegiance to another nation, you were, by operation of law, no longer Australian. And here is the part that still shocks people today. This rule applied retroactively in ways that people are still discovering. Men and women who became citizens of other countries in the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s went decades thinking they were still Australian, traveling on Australian passports, voting in Australian elections. And technically, they had ceased to be citizens long before. Now, the law changed in 2002. Since then, Australian citizens can generally hold dual citizenship without losing their Australian status. But, and this is a massive but, the question of what happened before 2002 is still being resolved for some families today. If you or your parents became citizens of another country before 2002 and assumed you kept your Australian citizenship, it is worth getting a legal check done. This is not me trying to scare you. This is me telling you what I genuinely wish more people knew before it became a crisis. And speaking of crises, let's talk about something happening right now, something the government has become significantly more aggressive about in recent years, something that doesn't just affect new arrivals. It affects people who have been permanent residents here for a decade or more. Permanent residency, that beautiful stamp in your passport feeling of security, the sense that Australia is your home now, officially, permanently. But here's the truth that the third point in today's video is built on. Permanent residency is not as permanent as the name suggests, not even close. The Australian government has the legal power to cancel your permanent resident visa, and they use it. The question is under what circumstances, and that's where people consistently underestimate the risk. The most well-known pathway to visa cancellation is the character test under Section 501 of the Migration Act. If you are convicted of a crime and sentenced to 12 months or more in prison, even if you serve a much shorter time, even if the sentence is suspended, you can fail the character test. And failing the character test means your visa can be canceled. This applies to permanent residents. It has applied to people who have lived in Australia for 20-30 years, people who came here as children, people with Australian-born kids, Australian partners, Australian grandchildren. The High Court has upheld these cancellations. The appeals have failed. Families have been torn apart. But here's what fewer people know. The character test isn't only triggered by prison sentences, associations with criminal groups, conduct that is considered not in the national interest, even certain patterns of behavior. These can all be used under the broader provisions of Section 501. And once the cancellation process begins, the burden is on you to prove why you should stay. The system is not innocent until proven guilty in the way people assume. Stay with me because the next 2 points are where things get even more counterintuitive. Let's talk about fraud. Not your fraud, someone else's fraud, and how it can still destroy your visa status. This is the fourth way, and it is one of the most emotionally devastating situations I have ever seen covered in Australian immigration cases. Here's the scenario. You arrived in Australia years ago. You used a migration agent to help you with your application. You trusted that agent. You paid that agent good money. You answered their questions, signed the forms they told you to sign, and submitted everything they prepared. Your visa was approved. You built a life here, and then years later the Department of Home Affairs comes knocking because that agent, the one you trusted, was fraudulent. They submitted false documents on your behalf. They claimed qualifications you never said you had. They fabricated references. They lied. And now the government says your visa was obtained by fraud even though you personally did nothing wrong. Can they cancel your visa for someone else's fraud? In Australia, the answer is it's complicated. And complicated in immigration law almost always means expensive and stressful and uncertain. The courts have wrestled with this. The key question is usually about what you knew, what you should have known, and whether the fraud was material to the visa being granted. But the investigations alone, the audits, the letters, the requests for information, can be terrifying and destabilizing for families who genuinely did nothing wrong. And this is why on this channel, Aussie Visa Updates, we always say, know what was submitted in your name. Request copies of your original application. Keep your records. Because if you can't prove what happened, proving what didn't happen becomes almost impossible. All right, we've talked about birthright assumptions, dual citizenship history, character test cancellations, and third-party fraud. Now I want to take you somewhere that almost nobody discusses. The fifth way is subtle. It builds slowly. And by the time most people notice it, the damage is already done. Absence. Simply not being in Australia. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're an Australian citizen. You can come and go as you please. And for citizens, yes, that is largely true. Your citizenship doesn't expire based on how long you spend overseas. But for permanent residents, the situation is fundamentally different. And this is where people make life-altering mistakes. A permanent resident visa in Australia comes with a travel facility. That travel facility, the period during which you can leave and re-enter Australia as a permanent resident, is typically valid for 5 years from the date the visa was granted. After that 5-year period expires, if you are outside Australia, you cannot legally re-enter as a permanent resident. You haven't lost your PR status inside Australia, but you can't get back in without a new travel document, either a resident return visa or citizenship or something else. And here is where people fall into the trap. They go overseas, life happens, a parent gets sick, a business deal extends, COVID hits and borders close, 6 months becomes a year becomes 2, and then they go to the airport to come home and they discover their travel facility expired while they were away. They are stuck. And getting a resident return visa from outside Australia requires demonstrating substantial ties to Australia, and the longer you've been away, the harder that case becomes. But it goes further than travel facilities. If you spend the majority of your time outside Australia for extended periods as a permanent resident, it can raise questions about whether Australia is genuinely your home. In some visa subclasses, prolonged absence can trigger review. And if you've been relying on your permanent residency as a stepping stone to citizenship, here's the detail that catches people off guard. The time you spend outside Australia generally does not count toward your residency requirement for citizenship. 4 years of holding PR, but 2 of those years spent overseas? You may only be 2 years closer to citizenship, not 4. Every day outside Australia as a permanent resident is a day not counting toward that future citizenship application. I want to pause here for a second, because I know some of you watching this right now are overseas. Some of you are permanent residents who have been outside Australia for longer than you planned. Some of you are panicking a little. And I want to say this clearly, panicking is not the answer. Acting is. There are pathways. There are options. There are resident return visas. There are onshore applications. There are legal strategies that experienced migration agents use every single day to help people in exactly these situations. The worst thing you can do is assume the door is permanently closed. The second worst thing you can do is ignore the problem and hope it resolves itself, because Australian immigration does not forget. It does not lose files. And the longer a problem is left unaddressed, the fewer options remain. So where does this leave you? Whether you're a citizen who's never questioned your status, or a permanent resident building your life toward that citizenship certificate, there are 3 things I want you to take away from today's video. First, know your actual legal status. Don't assume. If you were born in Australia after 1986, if your parents were on temporary visas, if you've held citizenship of another country at any point, get clarity. Book a session with a registered migration agent or immigration lawyer, not a friend who thinks they know, a professional. Second, keep your records. Every document related to your visa, your application, your approvals, emails, forms, agent correspondence, all of it. Store it digitally, store it securely. Because if your status is ever challenged, what you can prove matters more than what you remember. And third, stay informed. The Australian immigration system changes. Policies shift. Case law evolves. What was true 2 years ago may not be true today. This is exactly why this channel exists. Aussie Visa Updates is here every week, breaking down exactly what's changing, what it means for you, and what you need to do about it. If this video gave you something valuable, and I genuinely believe it did, then do me a favor right now. Hit the like button. It takes half a second and it helps this information reach more Australians who need to hear it. Drop a comment below telling me which of these 5 points surprised you the most. I read every single comment on this channel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel is your most reliable, most up-to-date, most human source for everything happening inside Australian immigration. Subscribe now and make sure you never miss an update that could change your future. I'll see you in the next video. Stay informed, stay protected, and take care of yourselves.